Joe Mullings from 160 Studios, and have I got a treat for you today? I've got two of the most experienced teammates in the TMG family, Holly Scott and Matt Kaufman. And today we're going to share some thoughts about where has talent access been, where is it today, and then where's it potentially going downrange. And we're going to talk about how things have changed and how you manage your career and how you manage your company. So first of all, Hal, welcome.
Hi, Joe. Nice to see you.
Good to see you again, and Matt.
Yep, glad to be here.
So we've got, Holly and I have been together, we're in our, well, really our third decade, because the first one is 1 and then 2, and so we're in our mid-20 years together, and Matt and I almost 20 years now, right?
Yep.
So there's a lot of experience here in the search world. And I'm going to be interviewing both of them today so they can share with you what you might want to consider as you navigate your career, make your decisions, how you ask for raises, how you hire people, and the experience that you put people through while managing your company and managing your career. So first question on the floor. We are in February, Matt, of 2021. It's been an interesting almost 12 months now. What has happened in the last 12 months in regards to managing a career in let's call it a pandemic world right now, and how is that potentially going to carry over in sort of the era to follow?
I'm impressed with people being more of a risk taker than I've seen in years before. And that includes the corporations and the hiring too. They, instead of saying, look, we need to protect our burn and protect our team, they're instead saying, who else can we hire? Where else can we grow? What else can we do? So you really have two thoughts here. If you're in a situation where it just makes more sense to sit still, I get it. You know, you have your family and you have a good career going, you want to stay, rightfully so, that's fine. But there is an opportunity for you to grow here. Now, don't feel like the pandemic is going to limit you, because it doesn't, and it hasn't.
Holly, so I'm managing my career. I'm in my 2 to 5 year, I'm in my 7 to 15 year, and I'm on my 20 plus year trajectory. Do I manage my career in the current state of affairs the same in all 3 of those categories?
Definitely no. We do have some opportunities here that weren't there before. And I think, as Matt pointed out, a lot of what we've experienced over the last 12 months has made us think differently. But the way I've seen it, it's been an acceleration of what was already in the cards in terms of our future and career development at each stage. The one component, I would say, what's similar about all 3 of those bands that you mentioned is the onus on the individual in terms of awareness and brand identity in a marketplace. So we have more tools now than we ever have before to actually proactively go out, seek out, investigate, court opportunities, markets, companies, individuals than we ever have before. And through the course of the last year, that has definitely become more of a focus, because it's actually been the tool, a lot of those tools that we use in the same media regard is the same way we're hiring and meeting and interviewing and everything else. So in terms of, if you're young in your career, start now. If you're in mid-career, start now. If you're in later career, start now. Think as you are the product or service to sell. How can I best represent myself and increase my value in the marketplace? Who and why will I be in demand? And defining that and then creating a plan can benefit any stage.
So you talk about, give me some very tactical things. What's the biggest mistake the 20-year plus person makes on his or her LinkedIn profile?
The most common one that I see in that younger category is...
No, the older category, the 20 plus year.
Oh, sorry, 20-year profile. Lack of substance, right? There's very few that do it really well and take advantage of how robust you can make your profile. So to me, at this point, and I believe you two would agree after these many years, the resume at this point is second to our profile and brand out in the public domain. So that should be as robust, as crisp, as context-rich as possible. What have you done? What have you accomplished? I was chatting with a gentleman yesterday who's a CEO and a very technical CEO from an early stage company. And I'm looking at his LinkedIn profile. He had nothing in there about the computer vision or the haptics or the sensors he worked on or the robotics or any of the areas that are of high interest these days. So those are the pieces that we want to make sure front and center, because that's what's capturing your market, that's what's capturing interest, and that's what's going to get you found. The key is to be found.
Matt, and let's just stay on LinkedIn for a second. On LinkedIn, you run a global desk, both functionality as well as types of technologies. One of the things, though, you've dominated over the last 2+ decades has been the commercial-facing market. So chatting with your people in commercial, whether it's a 3-year out of university or they're currently CCO or VP of sales marketing, what are the gaps that you see a lot of times as they present themselves online to the marketplace, on their LinkedIn profile and their resumes?
Sometimes they don't know what they've done, which is amazing to me. You live your life, right? You have your career, and sometimes you don't have the ability to articulate what you've done. And this is verbal and written. And so I would say that's the first thing, is to, from day one, no matter what your age is, no matter how long your career's been, no matter how long you've been at that particular company, keep track of everything that you do. So a year and a half from now, you don't have to remember, what was that project? What did I do? What was the revenue on that? What was the number of people on the team? Like all these tangible things that become important when you interview and when they go on your resume and go on your LinkedIn profile. So that's the first thing, is keep track. The second piece is literally practice how to convey what you do in a minute. And it sounds so easy, but if you ask any executive who's been doing it for 15 to 20 years, okay, tell me what you do, and start the clock. They can't. They just can't, because they've never done it before. It's not that they're not capable, it's that they've never practiced it. And it's like everything else in sports or in arts or in anything else that you do, it is practice. And I'm a huge believer in practice. I think that you have the ability to be much more coherent and cohesive in the way that you explain it, in both written and verbally. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is do you communicate well? Because I think that most people either don't have the data because they've forgotten it, or they don't have the verbiage, the vernacular, the simple thesaurus, just to be able to explain, this is what I do, and I do it well, and here's why. And that's all it needs. And that's why a minute is the timer that I usually use. Even if you're an executive, I think that that's enough time to be able to articulately explain yourself from a career standpoint.
For both of you, Matt, I'll start with you. And especially, let's go back to the commercial resumes for a second. So certainly, I still work a desk, as both of you do. When you have a sales commercial resume, they tend to index way too much towards the words like leadership and built and attained, and they forget that it's all about their numbers, no matter how senior you get. Do executive resumes, and when I mean executive, senior director and above in commercial, do they over-index towards words like leadership and built, and under-index towards the real empirical data that everybody's looking for? And do you get feedback on resumes on that?
Sometimes. So I would say that most people drive their resume so it looks like the way they want to be perceived. And when people look at themselves, and it's not an insecurity, I think everyone wants to see themselves as successful. Everyone wants to see themselves as loved, and leadership to an extent is part of that. You want people to like you. You want people to want to work with you. You want people to admire you. And that's the way the resumes sometimes are tailored, because they want that feedback. When the truth of it is, it needs to be balanced. No one is going to look at your resume and only see intangible information and think that that's enough. Because how can they possibly understand what the context of that is? If you're part of a sales force of 300 people, and you're number 3 out of 300, that's astounding. But yet sometimes they don't include that. And if somebody works for a company where the sales force is 30, and they say they're number 3, okay, that's nice. But they left out that piece that I worked in a sales force of 300. I worked in a situation where my quota jumped 80% and I still hit it. But they didn't convey it that way. They didn't articulate it in a way that makes someone who is not at their company, doesn't understand what that means, that it's another $4 million. It's massive. And so you have to always provide a certain level of understanding and go with the assumption that that person doesn't know anything about your company, your sales force, your quota, your accomplishments, because it is not apples to apples. And that applies from a sales rep all the way up to a VP of sales. There is no difference there. And so it needs to be a balance, because yes, you need to have some of the intangible piece so they see how you strategically think. That is important. But if you don't have any kind of data-driven information, they have no point of reference.
Yeah. Holly, on the technical side, because again, you work a global desk, functionally cover all the areas, startups all the way to the Fortune 50s. Let's answer that from the technical side, right? So the CTOs you work with, the VPs of R&D, the directors, what are they missing as they represent themselves to the crowd?
I think that there's something to be said for the data, certainly, right, and what you worked on. But let's talk more about what we accomplished. We took this project from an idea on a napkin to design stage, to product development, to a scale up, to launch. It was FDA approved. It was a PMA. They put some meat behind what you actually accomplished, because that tells a better story, right? And especially in a world now where we're seeing moves more frequently in all roles, right? 1 year, 3 years, those are more frequent than they ever were before. It's really important that you speak to what you accomplished in that. And I think that goes across the spectrum, and I agree with Matt on the commercial side. If I look at a commercial resume and that person could have been the dead last commercial rep versus the top commercial rep, they did a terrible job of setting up their accomplishments. And really that goes with technical as well. What did you do? How did you participate? What did your team look like? Size? Did you hit what were your outcomes?
And unwinding that IDE or the PMA or 510K is so important. We see people just go, obtained a product, took the structural heart, mitral replacement technology to market, obtained PMA. Unwind that PMA,
That's
right?
a lot
Unwind
right there.
that,
Yes.
right? Because although we all know it's a very complex accomplishment, and a lot of times, I think when you start to really unwind how you got it there and how you and your team not just attained it, but here's the problems we hit along the way, and then here is what we did in order to get around the problems, and here's what I learned, and here's what I'm going to bring to you. You almost have to be sort of elementary about unwinding your resume along the way. All right.
I think there's one step further than that is, and this is something that I prep every person when they go interview from 2 years out of school to 32 years out of school, is the ability to collaborate and how important that is with a cross-functional team, because in every company that always exists, from a PMA to launching a product to creating a new sales force, it's always cross-functional. And it comes down to this: what was our goal or project? What was my responsibility? What was the outcome? And what was my contribution? And I think it's important to be able to have both those conversations at the same time, which is, this was the team, this was my leadership, this was my participatory part of this, but this was also what I did. Because I think it's important to make sure that you can talk about how well you work with other people, but I also didn't ride anyone's coattails. This is what my part was, and it went well, and here's what it was. So this way, they understand, hey, look, this is not somebody who's just name dropping, which is what happens from time to time, especially on the commercial side. I was a part of that launch. I'm like, well, what part of that launch? And then if they can give me detail there, I'm like, okay, this person really was there. They drove this. So now not only are they a part of this great launch, but they were a major portion of it.
So let's talk about process now. We understand there's a market challenge, right? Candidates are being incredibly disrespected these days. And I get it, because organizations are overworked. We all know hiring is important until it's not. Holly, what is the biggest mistake that, whether it's a startup or whether it's a large, Fortune 50, what's the biggest 3 mistakes that companies make in the marketplace that blows their chance at landing great candidates?
It starts with the job description, right? Popping job descriptions out there without any real why. Individuals are going to lean in on opportunity when there's a real draw, and you're basically putting out a description with no real sizzle behind your organization overall. So you have a static posting in a vanilla world, company representation-wise. So the people who are going to apply, that you don't even know in what context you're pulling these people from, they're all going to be active and in job search mode. Doesn't mean that they're not quality candidates, but it means they're only one segment of the candidate pool, right? So I think that that's one, that it starts with the story in the marketplace. It starts with how you're represented in the marketplace. It starts with you being generally big picture of interest, and then telling more about what's the challenge we're looking to solve, right? And that actually goes back to, we're talking about the candidates and their resumes and how to really drill into those. If the candidate will step back, if individuals that are out there looking, especially the more senior you get because you have so much experience, step back and try and identify what is a challenge that I could solve within an opportunity, and then dovetail back into how you represent yourself. It's a higher level way of thinking, but you likely will yield better results. And that starts with the companies too. So it's whether it's 3 points or all three wrapped into one, I think that that's the most important place to start, is if no one is really leaning in anyway because of you haven't represented yourself in the public domain in a positive way or in the right channels, then it doesn't matter what posting you put out there.
I think it comes down to process. I think because process is a combination of pace, a combination of communication, as well as the feeling you want them to take away from when they interview with you. Because the majority of the time, they don't get the job. Only one person does. So the other 5 to 7 people who interview, they walk away saying, man, XYZ company treated me like a king. And I would tell anybody to work there, I'm so disappointed I didn't get it. As opposed to, they made me wait an hour, they didn't call me for a week, nobody gave me any direction or feedback on how to interview. The salary negotiation went sideways because the person who was talking to me, someone I didn't even know, I'd never spoken to before. The process is part of the challenge because I think that interviewing in general is not trained, it's not taught, it's just they kind of figure it out as they go. So they don't understand how to have a set process of, okay, every person who comes through us will do the exact same thing, so we have some kind of continuity and some kind of consistency that you can say, look, person X went through the process and they did this, person Y did this, and you can compare them. But if they met 3 people and they met 3 different people, and this one took 3 weeks, this one took a week, it's a very different experience. And I don't see how that you can decide who would be the better person for the company for that role, because they had completely different interviewing experiences. And I think process as a whole is one of the parts that frustrates candidates to no end. Like, why can't I get a call back? Why can't I get a response? If I'm not the person, just tell me. But yet that doesn't happen. They keep them on the hook and they don't tell them. And then the person leaves with a negative feeling and they say, company XYZ is not a place that I would recommend anybody to work for.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one more
Yeah.
just on that, because it's glaring. You have to have someone shepherd the individuals with a warm touch through the process, okay? If you can state all you want in the public domain, you can have the sexiest technology in the world, you can have them come through the interview process, and if the person has a dual job of being process-oriented and perhaps leaning towards HR, and doesn't have the warmth of, hey, let's talk about why this might make sense for you, what's on your mind, and getting that trust established, you will lose you lose credibility quickly. And then you won't know it. What'll happen then is they're open to other organizations and other opportunities, because everyone wants to have that feeling that they belong. And when big, small companies, you have to have someone helping to decide if you belong there. And that's what I feel our role has been over the years. We are able to see both sides and say, do they really belong? And let's help this individual find out if this is the place for them. And so often, and you can call it corporate recruiters, you can call it HR, you can call it, it's unfair to say it's not them, it's just what's piled on their plate in addition to what they have to do. You have to have someone who's going to be their Sherpa through their process, or else they don't feel like they really are connecting with anyone there. Everyone else is just an interview.
Well, it's interesting that how few of the times that I've done this in 19 years that a company said, hey, how was our process? What was your feedback? What did the candidates think? What did you think? You've seen 1,000 times. How did it go? The couple that do, I work a ton with, and I'm just so impressed with them that they, even though they're doing exceptionally well and their stock is climbing and everything's going great, they still want to know, how did we do? Did we treat that person right? Did they walk away with a good feeling? And did the people interviewing do a good job? Because that's the biggest thing. There is always, in a team of 6 interviewers, there's always one who doesn't really excel in that area. And they don't either train that person, teach that person, or pull them out of the process altogether because they clearly are not built for that. They're just not. And that's the thing that you'll see somebody go through an interview process, meet 6 people, and they love 5, and the 6th one, they're like, they said something really quirky. They said, I'm gonna be working 90 hours a week. They said, I'm gonna travel 80%. And you're like, that's not true. And I'm like, great. That person spoiled the punch for everybody because they're just not a trained interviewer. And it just circles back to having the right process. But one of the ways to get the right process is to get feedback, to find out what are we doing right and what are we not doing right and how do we improve.
Okay, final question. Holly, I'll start with you. I'm looking for a job, either passively or aggressively. And what is the one thing I can do to get myself more interviews?
First of all, I don't want to hire you. You're trouble. The more interviews. If I'm looking any stage of my career, I am researching where I'm going to add the most value, and I'm going to dismantle those companies organizationally and pick apart and selectively engage with those who I believe are going to benefit the most specifically from me. So if I'm a director of marketing, I'm going to know every VP of marketing in the area of data science or whatever particular, cardiovascular, whatever it might be. If I'm an engineer, I want to look in every R&D organization in a certain geography or technical state, and I want to engage with value with that individual. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to, first of all, LinkedIn is a great tool, as we know. We can send a connection request. Hey, very interested in your organization and what you're doing. My specialty is blah, blah, blah. I would love to connect. Boom, that's one start. Once you connect, you can get emails and you can directly send them information. You directly send them an email with more support about why you're interested in the organization. If you can't link in with them, if for whatever reason you can't, you can call the company, old school 101, call the company and say, I need to email Sam Schmidt some information. What's his email address? It's really not that challenging. And don't be afraid to do it. And I especially when I deal with my technical people, they're like, I'm not a salesperson. It's like, it's not sales. You're talking about something that you know, it's you. Okay? Everyone is in sales when it comes to their own brand and who they are and what value they bring to the table. So that's what I would suggest is I would create a very well thought out plan. I would reach out to every person that is likely in pain because they don't have me on their team, and I would reach out with value as to why I might be able to alleviate their pain.
Matt, on the other side of the fence, so I am a emerging tech startup and probably maybe B round or earlier, which is a solid part of your desk as well. How do I eventually attract the individuals or candidates who are not currently looking, but I want to get on their radar screen? So when I start to eventually put out my job posting, they send their resume in.
Well, there's 2 ways. One, not only 2, but 2 come to mind immediately. One is a certain level of visibility on LinkedIn and other social media. And there are creative, inexpensive ways to do that. Simple, either video or written content that describes what it's like to work here. What does it feel like to be here? Because people initially, they get excited about the technology, but that's not what actually pulls them in. It's the combination of the opportunity for me and the people that I'm working with is what really drives that final decision of, I want to work with you. I mean, that's why I came to work here. You know, it was an easy decision for me after I met everybody. And that's the first thing, is you have to get yourself to the point where people are paying attention. You want them to either follow you or watch your information. And you can do that in a way with a simple iPhone where it doesn't have to be, for those people who are watching their money, the expense is limited. The other part of it is, LinkedIn is such a fabulous tool as far as networking. It's the Kevin Bacon game. If you want somebody who has interventional experience or who has surgical experience, it's very easy to pull up everyone you know for the last 20 years that's in that space, and then you can see who they're connected to, who's in that space. You just do a simple search of marketing or engineering or regulatory or reimbursement or whatever it is you want, and you reach out to the person you've known for 20 years and say, hey, how is Stacy at reimbursement? She's phenomenal. Can you connect me? Absolutely. You cut right to the chase. Instead of trying to send a job spec out to 10,000 people, you just reach out to 30 through people that you know and you trust. Because at the end of the day, and my dad's been saying this since the day I was born, it ain't what you know, it's who you know. And that is the easiest way to get somebody on board who is not really looking, but because somebody they trust says, hey, you should work with Joe, they will. And that's, I think LinkedIn's a fabulous tool that way, just because of how quickly it gets you from A to B.
Got it. Well, that's, that right there is, let's see, 20, 45, that right there is about 80 years worth of headhunting experience in between the three of us, about 5,000 placements of knowledge, all at your hands. Live from 160 Studios, this is Joe Mullings with Holly Scott and Matt Kaufman. Be well.